Alright, ladies and gents, thanks for tuning in. So it's the Halloween season, and I wanted to make a mask, so let's have at it. Now we'll start out with the concept. Now the concept is not a direct thing, more of a feeling. There we have it, now into the building. I started out with a cheap 100 yen store mask and a paper mache cranium. With the paper mache dry and separated, I glued on a layer of clay to the face and cranium, and it's foam clay, by the way. When making the teeth, I rolled up two identical sized balls and shaped out the teeth. This was done 5, 6, 7 times, including the lower jaw. With the teeth dry, just stick them onto the face. With the teeth all set in place, a sausage clay was added in and blended in and shaped to make the gum line. I sculpted in some harder ridges to make the sculpture look more vicious looking. To make sure the teeth don't fall off, I also added clay to the back. Alright then, on to the horns. The classic tin foil and paper mache base was used. When the paper mache was dry, I hot glued it to the mask and just added another light layer of clay. Using a silicone tool, I added in some more details to make it look more like horns. Here you can see I'm using a gacha ball's rim, which is a perfect match for a broken headphone I had lying about. At this stage, I would recommend gluing in the mesh and other details into the headphone, as it's a pain in the arse later on. To make sure it's a nice snug fit, I traced around the headphones onto the mask and Dremeled it out. For the nose, I used a shaving gel cap. It was a little bit bigger than I wanted, so I had to trim it down a bit. When the trim pieces were all glued back together, I just wrapped it with EVA foam. The grill was traced from the cap and the Vox was cut and filed out. So that it can actually breathe, I added mesh to the back and glued in the entire nose into place. For some extra details, I used some board marker caps from work and blended everything together with more clay and sculpting. As with the teeth, the nose was set in place with clay in the back of the mask. I found the horns details really lacking, so I added in some more details to make them look like they were growing out of the skull. Again, for some more evil, ridged, vicious looking detail, I'm using the ball stylus to give some ridges. To reiterate, if you want to make something evil looking, just make it as pointy as hell. Using a cheap 100 yen store soldering iron that I filed down to a point, I melted in the cracked details onto the mask skull. And that's the face completely done. Now we're on to the jaw. For the base of the jaw, I used a cheap 100 yen store floor mat and then dremeled away the unwanted texture. Returning to the chin of the mask I used earlier, I cut away the teeth so it's easier to add later. Using hot glue and a wet finger, I glued all the main parts together. When I put all the parts together, I noticed that the jaw was too tall, so I trimmed it down. For attaching everything together, I dremeled in a hole to add in a magnet later. With the mask functionality done, I moved on to the details. Same techniques as before with teeth and sculpting. Here I am filling gaps with watered down clay, or slip as the pros call it. For the lower jaw, the teeth were made exactly the same as before, but they were compared with the upper jaw for spacing. The mechanical parts of the jaw were a bit flat, so I cut out some raised details. With the panels glued on, I used some headphone internals for extra detail. Now, to hide those ugly details, I used a shochu cap and I processed it all, sanded, cut, etc., all that kind of stuff. To simulate some vents, I used a magnetized board marker cap, and the gap was filled with a zip tie. To further raise details on the jaw, I used some strips of EVA foam, which were left over from my Imperial Ruins video, links above. Okay, on to the last details for the jaw. I used a snap button top, and the bottom of which I used to secure the mask to the cranium later on. To top the jaw off, I made some bolts using clay cutters, and that was pretty easy enough. Now, the cranium I cut off before was used here. Now, I needed to fill the gaps, so I used some EVA foam to do that. I cut out some wedges to, round out the shape of the skull. So that I can actually get in and out of the skull, I added some aluminum wire, which is, malleable. I can stretch it, I can do it, I can get in and out. With the cranium's functionality done, now it's on to all the details. I hid all the ugly hot glue joints with more foam clay. For the attachment points to the jaw, I used EVA and snap buttons and a strong magnet. With that done, I glued on the headphone pieces for which I made before, and added a leftover peg piece from a future project we will see later. For more mechanical detail, I used a Pringles can which I shaved and sanded flat, and then I used another broken headphone to cap it off. For the spinal connection points, I used another board marker cap from work, and I used some bug spray caps, which you can find here in Japan. Leading up from the spine, I used a juice pack neck and the head strap from the previously used headphones. Here I'm dremeling in some space from the headphone pieces that I made earlier. To make the entire mask breathable, I cut out some vents which were made from mosquito nets. Hot glue and wet finger technique again. Jeez, it's a lifesaver. To cut in some panel lines, I used a compass and then I filled in the center with a bleach bottle cap. These were followed by dish soap bottle caps as well on the back. Look pretty cool. Leftover buttons were added for extra details, and EVA foam was used to fill some extra gaps. The headphone gaps were filled with mesh, as I mentioned before. Alright then, on to the cabling. This cord was an absolute ball to put in place. I had to use metal pins and then I glued them in place. These pins were then covered with pen tubes. The spine was made from corrugated pipe and board marker detailing. These cords were then glued in place and then wrapped with EVA foam. Now, I ended up cutting off half of the spine because it was really impractical wear and really uncomfortable, so sorry about that. And to give the mask a secure attachment, I used some Velcro. Okay, that's it for the sculpting. Now we're on to the painting. To protect the clay, I used the classic Black Magic Craft Black Mod Podge and paint. Thank you. With that dry, I was all primed and ready to paint. Alright, the face and jaw was based in a desert yellow and the sponge highlighted. The sockets were painted darker and the teeth were painted brighter. All painted it up, just slather it with a brown oil wash. And wipe it back, it's easy as pie. It was a good day, so I masked the non-metallic parts and brought it outside for a spray. It's based in gunmetal. I painted the structure points of the mask with black and accent colours in a bright red. The black and red sections were painted in a scratchy highlight to simulate wear and tear. All the gunmetal parts were highlighted with a paint pen. These things are fantastic, man. I really recommend them. To make the meshes stand out, I dry brushed them with a bright silver. To finish everything off, I printed out 2 biohazard printouts and I just glued them on, and off screen I dabbed them with a sponge to give them wear and tear. And that's it all slapped together. Thanks for watching. Please like and comment and subscribe, all that jazz, if you want to. Anyway, take it handy. I hope you liked it. Bye bye.